This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. Hello and welcome to Roots and All. My guest this week is Jonathan Sheppard, a political lobbyist who somehow fell into becoming the holder of two national plant collections, Hollyhocks and Cosmos. Jonathan talks about how to grow hollyhocks and cosmos, what you can or can't do about rust, good varieties to try, and what to look out for in the coming year in terms of new varieties and colours. Jonathan begins with the tale of how he came to take over the collections.
Oh, crikey! That's a big question. I guess let's take we're sort of in autumn 2021. If we rewind, literally only 12 months ago, if we rewound to the start of September, there'd be no national collections here. So it's in one way, it's 12 months on to today. It's happened quite quickly. How it started, I guess. Let's start at the start. It's always a good place to begin. Is I went to Hampton Court, not a regular visitor. Myself and my wife went, and we bumped into some lovely ladies on the plant heritage site, and we were having a chat, and they were talking about what they do and why they do it, and it became apparent that they were on the lookout for national collection holders of many different types of plants. And so I was going down the list, and I saw, no one's done hollyhocks, and no one's done cosmos. And first of all, that was a huge surprise to me, because in my mind, they were, whilst obviously they're not native sort of UK British plants, they're very much regarded as, I guess, cottage garden type favourites. So I assumed someone would have done this. And the short version of it is that sort of after that conversation, I knew I'd grown hollyhocks just for fun, and I'd grown cosmos just for fun. I decided to have a go, because in my mind, what's the worst thing that could happen? You don't get a national collection, but you grow a lot of nice flowers. I grew them for fun. So the first one I took on were the hollyhocks, and I think in my mind I did that because I think they're harder to grow than cosmos. They can be a little bit awkward at times. So even though people tell me they'll self-seed anywhere and they'll grow in cracks, which is undoubtedly true, at the same time, because we live near farmers, I always got advice from a sheep farmer who told me that when he looked after sheep, his job was keeping them alive, because sheep do everything that they can to die, and his job was to keep them alive. And I thought, there's a bit of a parallel there with hollyhocks, and certainly with rust, is that it's often trying to die, and you're trying to sort of keep it as good as possible. So I did lots of research, sourced lots of seed. So both my collections are grown from seed. Which is perhaps quite different to some other collections where, when somebody's got a collection of established trees or perennials, that can be quite a different task. And then, fast forwarding that I was awarded the National Collection of Altias, of hollyhocks, last September. And then this June, I was awarded a National Collection of Cosmos, no less. So there's, if you look at the hollyhocks, I'm growing 70 different ones, and I say ones because several of them aren't included in the collection because they're a mix of seed. I've grown, I think, it changes sort of as I discover sort of new ones, of the Cosmos bipinnatus. I think I've got 66 different ones, although I've done Apricotta, which came out this year, so that'll be added to it for next year. And they both done, the hollyhock collection in its second year was better than ever, was massive, just amazing. Rust was less of an issue this year than I've ever had, which was surprising given the weather. And the Cosmos did really well. So it was literally, I had a go.
Brilliant. Well, I think that when I interviewed someone from Plant Heritage a while back, I went through the collections and I thought, I can't believe nobody's growing hollyhocks. But then again, I had the same thought as you. Well, actually, they are quite prone to rust. So I know a lot of people would go, okay, hollyhocks, rust, and you've said that you do have that problem, and I'm assuming you maybe have it slightly more because you've got so many of them in one place. Is there anything that can be done about it?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because there's several things that always get thrown, I guess, at me in a nice way. This isn't any criticism if they know you're growing hollyhocks. One is that what I always mentioned. Oh, that they grow in cracks. Well, yeah, thank you very much. That's not necessarily the best place for me to try and grow so many different cultivars. But yes, they do, as do other plants. I point out, and then they'll say I can't grow hollyhocks. So I'll purposefully say, well, what do you? So even next door neighbour can't grow hollyhocks. Don't know why you're doing that. I can't grow them here. Well, what do you mean you can't grow them? Oh, well, they get rust. It's like, oh, hang on. That's a different thing, isn't it? That's not that you can't grow them. That's perhaps that you can grow them and you get rust and you might not like the foliage. So there's several things I say here to people is to manage their expectations. If you're thinking of growing a plant that's going to look perfect throughout its whole life cycle, hollyhocks might not be for you. If you've got a really, really small garden, and therefore, because of the rust issue, hollyhocks might not be for you, but there's still ways of dealing with hollyhocks. So this is what I say. Expect that they will get rust, manage your expectations. Then if they don't, you're pleasantly surprised. If they do, this is what I do, and mine still get rust. You can grow what's called rust-resistant varieties. So Altia ficifolia, the fig leaf ones, are meant to be more resistant to it. But it doesn't mean they won't get it. It just means that they won't die sort of within the first couple of years from it, whereas others may weaken and be more susceptible. Planting them as far apart as possible, which is quite a struggle when you're doing a national collection. That's hard. My top tip is when you see any kind of infection, remove the foliage and dispose of it, but not on your compost pile. So I know lots of people these days are wary for health reasons about burning any plant material. But if you live in the countryside, using an incinerator and burning sort of rust-infected foliage is probably more acceptable in the middle of towns. Or get rid of it in your council garden waste bin. That's the best advice. If it's a really, really bad infection, so I would collection, there's reasons for keeping it alive. I would never say that I wouldn't use something like a rose clear treatment on it, but I'm wary about giving that advice because we all know that these kind of treatments can impact on pollinators. So for me, that is very much a last resort. And then the third piece of advice is if you're learning to live with it, remove the leaves. The plant can look a little bit funny, but it's then how you plant it. So if you plant it at the back of a border and underplant it with, whatever takes your fancy, underplant it with dahlias, you'll still have this spire that comes with amazing flowers. So fine, you might have had to pull the infected leaves off, but in my mind, it's no different than when people say, they're alliums and their leaves go all tatty. It's part of the plant. Don't fret too much about it. It's not something that's going to look perfect with foliage. Remove it. It's got that infection. That helps deal with it and helps stopping it spread and stops it spreading in future years. And accept the plant for what it is with this fault that actually still has no cure.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is anybody working on a cure?
Not that I know. Anybody wants to tell me, is there a cure? That would be fascinating. But it's very interesting. It's so as I say, this year I had a whole. We're fortunate enough that we moved to Lincolnshire for the very purpose that at the time land was cheaper than a lot of other places, and we got a 2-acre plot. Very fortunate in that sense. Though, as I say to many people who sometimes have a small garden and want a massive one, be careful what you wish for, because there are pros and cons of both having small and large gardens. So I'm in that way fortunate enough that I've done the national collection in more of almost a scientific formal setting, on a grid light setting with each different cultivar with a little 1 meter square bed, and also in actually growing in bins because rabbits are a huge issue here. But at the same time, I've broadcast sowed this year a 1 meter stretch wide by about 30, 40 meters down the edge of the plot. I let thistles grow in the middle of it. And it's amazing that the hollyhocks there, as almost like a naturalized planting, probably were a better example of what hollyhocks can look like than the actual collection that was, having to be staked up and all the rest of it when the winds came. and the rust didn't seem to impact it so much. And maybe that's because it's airborne, and the thistles and all the rest of it almost protected it from the disease that when it's being blown around.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. So you mentioned Ficifolia. Are there any other varieties that you would grow if that is a problem for people?
I'd say it's generally from what I know. There's Antwerp, which is also I think a Ficifolia type one. As I say, that I take photographs because I think when you're doing this kind of stuff, you shouldn't just show the plants at their best. You should show when this kind of stuff happens. What it does is that it just it seems to cope with the disease better. So it doesn't just wipe it all out and the plant kind of shrivel up and die and look at an atrocious mess. So those would be, and there's plenty of, there'll be Ficifolia yellows, and you'll be able to notice them even if you get some self-seeded ones, because as I say that the leaves do, it's what I said sort of in the name, it's called a fig-leafed hollyhock. It looks almost like a fig leaf, and they do seem to cope better. But sometimes I do think sort of people read rust resistant and they assume that they're getting something that won't get rust. It might not. That there'll be that some of my hollyhocks hadn't had a bit of rust, and you kind of scratch your head and wonder, well, why has this one got it and why has that one got it? But perhaps given that the last 2 years that we've had, we could say the same with COVID. Some people get it, some people don't. Some people suffer really badly from it, and some don't. Perhaps and I'm no expert on it as a disease in the sense that as I say, sort of having done all the research, I haven't particularly found a cure. That there's ways of again dealing with it. I should add that I'll give the plants a seaweed foliar feed, I put biochar into the soil, because the advice I think is that if you can give your plant, certainly with a hollyhock, the chance to be its strongest plant as possible in terms of health, then it's likely to fend off any disease that's there. And as I say, that rust is around. Rust travels in the air. It's around. I'm never going to be able to avoid it. So I've pretty much learned, you have to learn to live with it, and you still get some great looking flowers.
You mentioned then as well that some of them may be short-lived if they get a particularly bad bout of it. Are they, I mean, I think sometimes they're advertised as biennial, but are they more short-lived perennials?
I when people ask me, because online you get people having great debates about the one bit that they've read on Google. The way I portray hollyhock is I'll say it's often been listed as biennial. It's called short-lived perennial, and that's kind of how I treat it. And then people say, and they're right. My hollyhocks comes back year after year, and absolutely, I've got some hollyhock nigras that absolutely come back year after year. It isn't the fact that they're seeding, because round here the seeds, unless they're isolated, would all cross pollinate, and they certainly won't come back the same colour. So in my mind, the advice I give is treat it as a short-lived perennial. So ones that I will be sowing this autumn, I sow them this autumn in the hope, and generally it happens that I will get flowers next year. So I'll get flowers within a 12-month period, but it's over 2 calendar years. So it's going from the autumn of one year into the spring and summer of the next year. I would hope that a lot of those will come back, and they do come back. But as I say, the prevalence of rust means that there's, and indeed other pests, including plenty of wildlife, is that there's going to be some attrition. It's not like, as I say, that you're growing something like a really hardy shrub that once you've got it, it's totally bulletproof. They're not as plants that I could. And it's almost that there can be no explanation. I could have 1 square meter plot where, all 5 that were in it come back. And then the next one, you're thinking, well, why are 3 of those gone? But it could be rust. It could be just different soil conditions. Did I put different compost down? Did the birds pull 3 of those up, or the rabbits chew 3 of those up, or the moles push 3 of those up? There's so many variables, which is why I enjoy gardening, that you think you've done the same thing. And you definitely haven't, which is why you get a different result. If
they self-sow, do they tend to revert to a particular colour if they do that?
Oh, well, interesting. I think on the whole, because there's just a lot, it's sort of more so in that kind of colour band, they tend towards eventually all sort of going towards the pinkish type colours. But that being said, because again, with this with this national collection, and I've tried to sort of get as many different cultivars as possible. The cross bred seeds that I broadcast sowed, I get loads of yellows, pinks with white centers, which are obviously crossbred from all the halo varieties because they have a different coloured center. And to me, it's almost the perfect pastel look, which I quite like.
Yeah, definitely. And also, you said about sowing them now. If you were to do that, how would you overwinter them?
Well, so the hollyhocks that are outside, obviously they stay outside. So at this time of year, again, I've collected pretty much most of the seed, and I'll be going out and chopping them to the base. So they the ones that are outside and even in containers, they stay outside and they're perfectly happy. What I think we all want from a seed, a lot of people say, well, just do what nature does. Well, that's not always the best thing, because with nature, and I know, for example, just from one hollyhock in my front garden that there may be a chance I might be able to name if I can prove that it's very sort of different from everything else. That's produced 2,000 seeds, minimum. In nature, you're not going to get 2,000 of those germinate. That's why it produces so many seeds. So for me, I'll sow them in cells. Now, I'm again fortunate enough to have a polytunnel. I'll pop them on into 7-centimeter pots, and that's where they'll overwinter. And it's not particularly because that they won't, it's not heated. It's not that they won't survive the weather. It's just the fact that if there's any fresh new growth, if I leave them outside living where I do rawly, something will pull them up, eat them up, and just destroy them. And that's just the nature of what will happen. Which again comes back to, that's why plants seed so much and have so many seed. It's because then they hope that one or two will survive those conditions. So they're kept in an unheated place, or just a sheltered spot, frankly, would work, and they will get planted out next year.
Yeah. And also, I was thinking about your varieties then. How do you ensure that yours don't cross-pollinate and become kind of pink?
Yeah. So initially, I've sourced enough seed initially to probably have kept the collection going for well over a decade. But we're fortunate enough to have Gardeners World came and filmed, and they were laughing because and it was probably the biggest compliment I've had, and they wouldn't have realised it, that the film crew was saying they'd never seen so many bees in one place, and they were just laughing because obviously they know about plants probably far more than I do. They were saying, you've got no chance of isolating these plants, and it's a tough job. And so from that respect, again, because it's literally only in its second year of existence, I had to leave everything from last year to work out, to start doing the notes, to say, well, which plants did come back, which didn't. And part of the job of isolating it has involved me, my wife helping me, what's called enviromesh, which frankly isn't that environmentally friendly because it's made of plastic, but it gets used time and time again. And slipping them over, in one way, it perhaps is easier than other plants, slipping them over almost the tower of hollyhock buds before they open up, tying it so the insects can't get in. And then I've been tickling them with a cotton bud, to pollinate them myself, and then with the view of seeing if those seeds come true. And that's part of the process that in one way, a national collection isn't there just to, hey, look, I've got a national collection. It's learning about a type of plant of which no one else is doing the work, and I include sort of the RHS in that. I've been having conversations with the RHS because I've discovered, or I think I've discovered, that certain named varieties are in fact the same plant. And and it's almost, there's no one really to pass that on to because they haven't got the time to police it. And frankly, who cares if you're looking for a black hollyhock? You probably don't really care about what the name is. But when you're trying to protect and, for future generations, specific cultivars, it's quite important what the names are.
The best hollyhock I ever saw, and I'm sure you've heard this story a million times, it was growing in France in a gravel driveway, and it was massive and beautiful, had barely any rust. Is that the sort of conditions they like? Do they like dry and well drained?
Yeah, no. This is where I and people who know me purposely always throw at me, the best ones, they grow in a crack in the pavement. as previously mentioned. That drives me nuts, and they know it does, because, okay, I get what you're saying, because in one way they're trying to just goad me into, look, there's no point you mollycoddling these plants, because, look, they do their best on their own. I think that can apply to a lot of plants, to be fair, that the best one in the crack is the one that's the toughest and the ones that survived. However, what I do think is interesting, because I've got some growing in gravel, is certain parts of those conditions are absolutely what the hollyhock needs, that actually I just can't replicate for a national collection. So in my mind, I tested this in my polytunnel. I sowed some and didn't water them. And it gets up to, when the doors have been closed in the summer, it gets up to 70 degrees Celsius in there, and they looked amazing. So one lesson is, if they're growing in the ground, they'll find their own water. You don't need to be drowning them, and actually the water may help spread the rust. Then what I learned in the actual national collection part, which is in these 1 centimetre square beds, they don't get watered, the ones that are in the ground. But where they suffer there is that because they grow so tall, irrespective of all what you try and do with stakes, they rock, and they actually move huge bits of earth, which doesn't particularly do the plant very good. Whereas ones that are in cracks or indeed in gravel have got this weight, and it helps them not move. So for my mind, you get a straighter plant, it looks better, it doesn't particularly have water, gathering round its feet, which I don't think it likes. And I think that kind of condition can help. So that's why my suggestion is, look, the ideal place is absolutely probably the back of a border, could be next to a brick wall growing along your fence line. Hollyhock will love that.
Obviously, you've got 70 varieties. Are there any that you would particularly recommend to anyone who was a bit nervous about growing them?
Yeah, you shouldn't have favourites. And I always say that, and I believe this, that I think every plant, irrespective of hollyhock or not, I don't just grow hollyhocks, that has its chance to shine in your garden. That it might be at its best for a month, a day, or even just 1 minute. So as we know with poppies, that a gust of wind comes along and it's gone. But for that 1 minute, it's your absolute star in the garden. For me, the hollyhock that I always come back to are some of the halo varieties, and I think they were bred by not that long ago by Thompson and Morgan. Halo peach, I just love. It's not too tall, as a lot of the halo varieties don't grow as tall as some of the others. Halo peach isn't actually that peachy, or it's just slightly more rich than a halo cream. So it's come on beyond cream. It's got sort of yellow and a slight peachy tinge, but not too much. That's one of my favorites. And then I always go back to, I never used to grow doubles, as in sort of the double hollyhocks that William Chater was a famous breeder. And there are various Chater's doubles, but then there's also one called Peaches and Dreams, which to me is, and I know people are often aghast that I say this, but I think it's as good as a peony. It's absolutely amazing. And I know people then say, you should grow singles because the bees love singles. That's absolutely true. But I've got more evidence. It takes them a bit longer, but they absolutely love going in the doubles, and they often end up sleeping inside them. So, it's not that it's not a benefit to insects either. I'm just always, every time I go down the plot, those are the two that I say that I'm drawn to. A lot of people will like Nigra, which is one of the most black looking plants I've seen, but it can be quite a contrast. So that's very Marmite for some people that they don't like that. But there's so many to choose from. But I would definitely Halo Peach and Peaches and Dreams are two of my favourites that if I had to grow some, that's what I'd be saying. They're easy to germinate from seed, is my view. That they can be harder to look after, in the sense that if somebody follows the official instructions, they may well sow them, let's say sometime next year, and only then will they realise that they might not get a flower next year because they've sowed it next year. And then hollyhocks are susceptible to what we said. There is a disease that attacks hollyhocks, whereas for some other plants, they're a lot easier to look after. But I think the reward is immense, in the sense that from a packet of 50 seeds, you can get some monster big plants, and at the same time, if it's something you're interested in, you will never be short of seed again.
No, and they are, like you say, such good value plants and so easy to germinate. So they make a brilliant, especially like if you're not that into gardening and you don't have very good knowledge, or maybe children, I think they're a perfect plant for them.
I mean, what I'd add to that is, if you do buy a packet of seeds and you don't want to do all the the overwintering and stuff, broadcast sowing works. I mean, to the extent that because of where I live, there are lots of what I would call countryside pests that will really, and that's fine. My garden's open to all wildlife, so it's not something I moan about, but it's something I'm aware of that the rabbits will have a good test of anything, even plants that are poisonous to them. Anything that touches their nose, they'll have a little go at. But if you're in a more secure type garden, you buy a packet of, let's say, even just 20 seeds and direct sow them into a weeded border, you'll get some decent hollyhocks out of that.
Yeah, they're brilliant. And talking of plants that are easy to cultivate, I wasn't going to ask you too much about the cultivation of the cosmos. I thought maybe we could talk about some new varieties that might be coming out, or some ones that you particularly like again, because I noticed that there are kind of every year there seem to be a few that pop up. So I think the cupcake ones have been quite popular this year, but is there anything else?
Yeah, I mean, again, if I talk about my favourites, again, it can change that this year I liked Xenia, even though a lot of people said it didn't perform very well for them. That was amazing. And actually Capriola, which was, I'd describe it as sort of white in the middle and almost this bubblegum pink on the outside, quite in your face. What came out this year, which I just had a couple of packets of, but it's now been taken on certainly by the likes of Mr. Fothergill as one of their new for 2022 Cosmos, is Apricotta. And I want to grow, I've got about 4 or 5 plants that grew this year. I just think it looks really, really nice. And then at the same time, it comes back to part of the national collection is being honest and saying, varieties that didn't particularly work for you. Now, it's not necessarily that there might be bad varieties, it might not just work for me. So I always say that I preferred, as yellow Cosmos bipinnatus, I thought Lemonade was a much better Cosmos than Xanthos. Xanthos for me was just always a little bit fiddly, and you had to spend so much time deadheading that you probably lose the will to live. Whereas Lemonade, they were just seemingly, or indeed Kiro, which is another yellow, much sort of bigger flowers. But that might just be, this is the problem, that might just be my personal preference. So what I always say to people is, give it a go, because what I like, you might not like, and that's again the joy of gardening. Yeah. We don't all need to like the same thing.
No, I think I do agree with you. I think Xanthos was a little bit more wilder looking, maybe, whereas Lemonade was definitely very showy. Interestingly, I did grow Xenia, and this is one of the things about Cosmos that I find they are very variable within the seed packet. So some of them did absolutely nothing, whereas some looked really stunning. And another one that I grow quite a lot is Purity, and some of the plants are like 7.5 foot tall, while others are maybe 5 foot tall and not as wide. So, you never quite know what you're getting with a packet of Cosmos seeds.
Yeah, and to be fair to like the seed breeders and all the rest of it, you get rogue, and this is what I mean, you get rogue seeds and all the rest. I had one, and I can't remember the variety, but I should have done because it frustrated me no end. I probably sowed from different packets. I'll do a batch of 15. Then I did another. I had 0 germination, not even 50%. And finally got about 3 plants. And whether that's down to the seeds, the variety, the people that are selling it, you just all I can do is note it. And at some point, as a collection holder, you may say, look, we're not keeping that in the collection because it's not a viable plant. There's no obligation to grow everything, because as we know, if you looked at sweet peas throughout history, there's probably been about 7,000 different named ones. I know that the national collection holder won't be growing them all. So some plants, go out of existence because of the threat of fashion and things. Others go out of existence just because they're not that good a plant when they were bred, and people don't want them. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in life.
No. Just a quick question about the cultivation of cosmos. I do sometimes find that they self-sow around the place. Do they come true from seed, and is self-sowing quite a regular occurrence?
You wouldn't believe what I did last week. I put online that I told my wife I was going out hoovering, and then in a quiet voice I said, I'm hoovering up the seeds where the National Collection was. I suspect from... they will cross, so they won't necessarily come true. That's the first sort of answer. I suspect I've now got I grew a patch of what I'd describe as probably 80 square meters. So it was 20 meters by 4 meters of plants that were just a mix, that I didn't deadhead for the flowers, didn't water, just left them. It was the most amazing part of my garden. The bees loved it. But then what I did, I collected all the seed just to create my own personal seed mix. I suspect I've probably got 200,000 seeds, having weighed them and worked out how many they are. I think it'll make a nice mix. But there's in no way can I guarantee really what those seeds will look like. If it's a seed mix, I think that's wonderful. I was told by another grower that the way, and I can't remember whether she said this was being done in Holland or Portugal, the way they had essentially grown the specific varieties of cosmos was that each specific cosmos had its own greenhouse just for growing that. And so, those are the lengths that actually go into growing, to make sure that the packet of seeds that you get is what comes out of the packet, and that's what you should expect to get.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating experiment, and it's really good if you can just get a batch and then you're not sure what's coming out. It's sometimes frustrating when you're trying to plan a border, but it's also nice when you get a pleasant surprise. So I can see that. But if people wanted to buy seeds from you, are you selling them at the moment?
Yeah, I've got a little blog, which, and again, we put some on, and we're just, on the whole, it will be seed mixes from the two national collections. It's just a bit of fun, and this is no complaint, because sometimes I know people will say, well, you didn't have to do it. The cost of doing this national collection ended up being slightly more than I thought it was, as I say, because we had when we planted during lockdown, certainly in its first year, all the hollyhocks went out, and probably 2 days later you couldn't see a piece of green, because it comes back to I wasn't joking, where the moles had pushed them out from underneath. The blackbirds had pulled them, and then the rabbits had scalped them. So I had to do and I'm sure they were wondering why I'd done it. I had to do an emergency order of black bins, the old-fashioned sort of bins that you'd get, that you put your rubbish in, sort of 90 litres. 100 of those. Well, that's over £1,000. So it's a one-off. But the cost of doing these two national collections hasn't been insignificant. So we put a few packets of seeds online, and the money goes to hopefully keeping and expanding and keeping the national collection and learning more about it, and protecting some of the varieties, because certainly some of the hollyhocks are regarded as plants under threat. That it's getting rarer and rarer to see various cultivars being grown by nurseries. I say we're not a nursery. I'm as just an individual. It's done in my spare time, but we're trying to learn about these two different types of plants, and almost be this repository of knowledge, so that when I pop my clogs, hopefully in a long time, there'll still be some of these varieties around.
Yeah, well, I think you're doing a great job. Would you recommend having a national collection to anyone?
I would, and I guess there's several reasons. It comes back to, I always have the philosophy that any achievement starts with the decision to try. Their Plant Heritage, the charity, are always on the lookout for willing people. So it doesn't always have to be as big a scale as mine, and by that I mean, you're going to need a lot of space to grow a lot of hollyhocks. That's just the nature of the beast. But that's why I took it on, because I knew I'd got the space, and I thought, well, what am I going to do with it? The alternative is that at some point, again, when I'm gone, someone will probably build a load of houses on it or whatever. So I thought this was a much far better thing to do. I would recommend it because I think they're a really supportive charity. So they've got this wealth of knowledge that they're just wanting, I guess, sort of willing volunteers, so that you can go to their website, just type plant heritage into Google, you'd find it, and you'll find a list of plants that haven't got a national collection. Now you imagine if you're listening to this and then you say, well, crikey, I love growing that. My challenge to that person would be, which is what I gave myself, what have you got to lose? Give it a go. The worst that will happen is that you will learn a little bit more about that plant. I assume you'll have a go at growing a few more different varieties of it. And who knows, you might get a national collection. There you go.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the interview. And thanks as always to you for listening. Here's Dr. Ian Bedford talking about what must be our biggest and most harmless airborne bugs.
The astonishing aerial acrobatics of dragon-like creatures as they chase, capture and devour hapless little flying insects across the summer sky never fails to amaze me. But thankfully though, they're not fire-breathing dragons of ancient myths and legends, but are the incredible four-winged insects that we call the dragonflies. However, the dragonflies and their cousins, the damselflies, would certainly have been a common sight when those stories of damsels in distress and gallant dragon slayers were being relayed 1,000 or so years ago, since they're a highly successful group of invertebrates that were one of the first winged insects to appear on Earth. And fossil evidence reveals that, despite early dragonflies being giants, with 30-centimetre wingspans, they've hardly changed in appearance since those prehistoric times. But, over the past 300 million years, they certainly honed and perfected their flying skills, evolving to become probably the most adept airborne predators within the insect world today. And here in Britain, we have over 30 different species of dragonfly, which, although similar in appearance to their damselfly cousins, are larger, with stouter bodies, and have wings that always remain open when at rest. They're also much stronger flyers than the damselflies, who tend to flutter like a butterfly. Taxonomically, dragonflies are in the order called Odonata, which means toothed ones, and it relates to their sharp serrated jaws that slice up their prey. And they have what are thought to be the most highly developed eyes of the insect world. Huge eyes, each with 30,000 individual lenses that provide almost 360 degrees of excellent vision, perfect for seeing prey on the wing, judging its speed and trajectory, before snatching it mid-air, then briefly landing to devour it. Often catching hundreds of small flying insects throughout the day, the dragonflies become major predators of mosquitoes and midges during those summer months. But alas, this onslaught doesn't last for long, since dragonflies only live for a week or two. But it's long enough for them to find a mate and initiate a further generation of their species. So whilst the males live out their final days catching food and skirmishing with rival males above the breeding grounds, the females lay their eggs into ponds and gently flowing streams. Eggs that soon hatch into larvae that live underwater for around 2 years, snatching and devouring many different aquatic invertebrates, tadpoles, and even small fish. Then when fully grown, they emerge from the water, climbing up vegetation where they shed their skins and reveal the next generation of dragon-like creatures that'll hawk, dart, skim, and chase across the sky once again on those sunny summer days.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.